will focus on the experience of livable cities in the rapidly urbanizing world and developed countries. As we all know that more than half of the world's population is living in cities nowadays, and it is growing rapidly, and we expect more and more, most of the urban population will be in cities. The scale of growth is unprecedented, and it has social, economic, and environmental challenge for those who live in the cities. And we find big differences in the quality of life in different cities. So the issue of livability is becoming an important issue regarding the improving the city identity, value, making it attractive to inhabitants, visitors, talents, as well as business developers and investors. And as we all know, the city has started from small settlements, small conglomeration of people, and they started to create interest in living in the city for trade and services and infrastructure and better quality of life. So it has developed these structures of houses, of public buildings, of shopping centers, of hospitals, of offices to accommodate these needs. Cities are usually situated in a confined geographical area. There is a specific area where it is located, and every city has a genius loci, a place that it is located was significant for the rest of the region. So the facilities, the interchange of goods, the services, this is what attracted people to come to the city. And as we discussed in the first half of the semester, cities took different forms and layouts depending on the city location and surroundings and different developments that it went through. So when we talk about the urban form, we talk about the physical layout of the city, the spatial imprint of an urban transport system, and the adjacent physical infrastructure that limit the expansion or extension of the city. So all these are what we call a level of spatial arrangement of cities. There are global themes that we are witnessing nowadays, especially with the current situation, that how cities impact our society, demographic trends, and health systems. How these social conditions and demographic trends impact our health care systems and situations. So the investigation of how cities will change and develop with the rapid urbanization of many parts of the world. Are we going to continue with the same trend? Are we going to find new ways to make our cities and change the existing cities? Our main goal, Tawan, is to have a city that provides good health and staying free of illness. Is not understood by everyone, and currently it is even more understood. There are many research now about what is the relationship between city planning and city design and city conditions with the pandemics and epidemics and infectious diseases. So well-being refers to the general sense of enjoying life and feeling fulfilled, safe, and secure. It also refers to the sense of comfort, safety, and security people feel in their environment, at home, at work, and in the city in general. All over the world, there are mega trends that are affecting our cities. First is the healthcare. Healthcare is becoming we will see in the future, inshallah, that it will become a major issue in studying cities after the conditions that we are going through now. So people will start to realize that we have to look back at our cities. How are they designed? What are their current conditions? Are they safe? Are they healthy? Are they secure for people or not? So healthcare will become a very important issue. Lifestyle also will become an important issue because it affects also the health and safety of the city. And who we are as society. We need to look at the fundamentals of the society. How was the society shaped? What are the forces that affected it? And how should it continue in that same manner, or how it should change? So the focus on what aspects of health, well-being are most important. And they are very tied together. How satisfied people are with these aspects, and the role that technology plays in helping society maintain better health and well-being. As we see nowadays, there are many technological advancements in the area of health and connectivity and applications and so forth. So there are important factors that contribute to the citizen health and well-being across the world. First, safety and security, a basic need, access to public health care, a sense of belonging, and cultural diversity and inclusiveness. This is very important word, inclusiveness. The city should provide services and health and well-being for everyone, and efficient consumption of energy, because the levels of pollution that created by humans during the past decades are affecting the quality of life and health of its inhabitants. So the key points that the world is experiencing right now is the rapid and widespread of urbanization, and how it could destroy life as we know it. Cities are the places where most of the people live, and the type of planning and architecture that we make in the city nowadays is definitely not going to continue. If it is to continue, if the urban environment with all its opportunities for fulfillment is to become the habitat for nearly all humanities, then we must take a radical different approach and create different forms. And this is your role. You should not only comply to the taken for granted theories and rules of any trade. They have to be critically assessed and understood how they are advancing, or they have advantages or disadvantages to the human
Doctor,
beings.
there's something I don't understand.
Yes.
In order to do
Go ahead.
an urbanized city, can you go back? So in order, doctor, the slide before, no, after, point one. I wanted to ask, what does, I mean, I don't understand the last sentence.
The last sentence says that we expect most of the humanity to be living in urbanized areas in the future. And the form of the city should not be the only form that we as designers for living. Other forms. Currently, we don't know what. This is something that you need to find through research, through experimentation. We will talk about some attempts here, but we should not think about the city only as roads and buildings. The city must be something different and something more than that. So that's and you need to have to critically think about the taken for granted assumptions about the form of urbanity that we are currently using. Okay, so this is an open issue that you can investigate in your master's and PhD and future studies. How can we change that? And if you work in a governmental institution or office, this will be a good chance that you propose a different approach to what are people accustomed to do. So either you do that through studies and research, or through your practice, you can provide a different approach, a different vision of how cities should be and how we should transform our cities. Okay?
Okay, doctor, I understood.
Okay?
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Thanks. The second thing is that urbanization will take the form of hundreds of new, separate, traditionally ordered cities. But a new phenomenon already appeared in urbanizing regions from the 70s, but is not widely recognized. It's called the non-city, and it's a new phenomenon or a new paradigm that does not look at the city as a one entity, but rather as separate multiple entities. So that is facilitated by the networking and the transportation. So we no longer need to have this one unified, centralized city as we already have. The non-city, rapidly urbanizing regions need a new style of planning, a new form of governance capable of strong but open and inclusive leadership focused on the whole region and the long term. So we need to provide a new style of planning, a new form of governance. And as we talked before, cities change and evolve through governance. If you have a leadership, a government that is interested in change, interested in making difference, they act quickly in making that change. So instead of consuming natural capital at an accelerating rate, urbanization must be reinvented to rebuild natural capital. So we need to look back at the city as part of nature. We need a new vision, a new thinking, a new picture of the city that integrates it with the nature. So as we said, that urbanization must be reinvented. to strengthen natural systems, we need to go back to appreciate nature and respect nature. Nature is now punishing us by due to the climate change, due to the rapid urbanization, to the overcrowdedness, to the many mistakes that we did in our practice on the earth. And this is, we need to go back and look at the natural systems and making the most of locally generated low carbon energy and closing the loop in flows of resources and materials. طبعا, you currently notice that most of the problems are happening in cities, in the crowded areas, in the congested areas. This is where problems happen. So we need to look back at these deficiencies in our future practices. Another important issue is that the inequality in cities. We see in almost every city around the world enclaves for different social classes and economic classes. We have the super rich, the rich living in luxurious compounds and side by side with the poor, impoverished, informal shanty towns in different parts of the world. As we see here in this slide, this is just the wall between this luxurious, lavish environment and the shantytown informal housing environment that is in. Actually, those people in the poor area have better view than the ones in the rich compound. The ones in the rich compound, they are always looking at this, but those people in these areas are always looking at this nice view. But in reality, they both live in different worlds, different quality of life. So we cannot look at the city as a whole. We need to break down the problem into smaller problems so that we can find appropriate solutions. Non-cities, rapidly urbanizing regions can provide a rich urban life for ordinary people and can be livable and sustainable under certain stringent assumptions. So we need to provide the quality of life and the health care and the healthy environment for everyone. Now we have new tools, we have new basics that we didn't have before. We have new types of energy. We have new types of information exchange. We have new types of transportation. We have a rich mix of people and population, different classes, different education, different origins. This is a wealth for the city. But the dynamism of these rapidly urbanizing regions can pioneer new models for transformation of the mature cities to fully urbanized countries. In order to explore this scale of urbanization without the wholesale collapse of the climate and ecosystems, we have to have a strong global and local measures. Enough is enough. We need to control the consumption of fossilized energy and the production of pollutants in the sky. So putting a price on carbon and a value on nature are preconditions for livable urban environments. We cannot keep doing what we used to do. We have to stop, pause, think, and then find other solutions. So the factors that affect the cities are its geography, its impact on natural environment, its social, political, and economic forces. We talked about most of these in previous lectures. The trade practices, the time, the period of development. It's very important to understand the evolution and development of any city within the historical context and time of the city. Now we will just briefly go through some examples of international cities. The first one is Moscow. Moscow is the biggest city in Russia, is the capital, and it grew in a pattern of rings, as we see. And we have seen this example in the Gulf. Where did we see this? The growth as rings. We saw it in partially in Jeddah, and we saw it in Kuwait, where the city planning was parallel to the old wall. So it grew from the nucleus of the old city into larger. The center is the Kremlin and the Red Square. Successive epochs of development are traced by the Boulevard Ring. We start to have larger and larger rings of the city. The Garden Ring, there is a green belt around the city. The Moscow Little Ring Railway, there is a railway that goes around that connects the city districts, and the Moscow Ring Road that surrounds the city as a whole. So its history and its evolution followed this same pattern. For Chandigarh, we see a different pattern. The primary module of the city.
Doctor, where is Chandigarh?
Chandigarh in India.
Okay.
And it's a very famous place where Le Corbusier designed the parliament. It's a newly designed city, and it was based on a module of 800 meters by 1200 meters of self-sufficient unit, shops, schools, health centers, places of recreation, and so forth. We also saw this before. We saw this before in the planning of Kuwait City, where the ring roads and the radial roads contained self-sufficient neighborhoods. All these were practices of the mid-20th century, after the Second World War. And it is repeated all over the world. And it has, each sector has a population 3,000 to 20,000. It can, the average was about 5 to 10,000. And this is also the same what happened in Kuwait. So we see the difference between the natural evolution of Moscow and the planned scheme of Chandigarh. Shopping street of each sector is linked to adjoining sectors, thus forming one long continuous ribbon of shopping. Central green of each sector also stretches to the green to the next sector. So they try to connect the neighborhoods through the green and the shopping. This did not happen in Kuwait. The highways prohibited the neighborhoods from being connected to each other. Now they try to make bridges over the highways, but of course it's difficult to walk on the bridge in the hot summer. San Francisco in the Western US, of course, was designed to accommodate outrageous number of people that came to the city during the gold rush. طبعا كان في a stage in the history of the United States called the gold rush. Everyone was going from the east to the west to find gold. So they go to the gold mines, to the rivers, and they start to find gold, and in order to get rich fast. All the west coast was at that time a destination for everyone to go and find gold. It was laid out in a grid pattern imposed on the city hills on the end of the peninsula. So while it's not a flat land, but also the grid part, the grid pattern was superimposed on the city. So some parts were following the irregular form, and some parts were following the grid form. And this is also we saw in some cities in the Gulf. Some parts kept its regular form, like the south part of Jeddah, while the north and all the extension to the north was following a regular grid iron. But downtown San Francisco is extremely dense. The Planning Commission split downtown into 4 separate zones. So here we find the application of zoning: office district, retail district, general commercial district, and support district. So this is another approach to separate the functions of the city into different systems, districts. The city of Mumbai in India also is constrained by the sea, and this is what also we found in several cities in the Gulf region. In Jeddah, it is constrained from the west by the sea and by the hills in the east. So the only expansion was towards north and south. We have the industrial areas and the ports and stuff like that. So the north was the only available extension direction. As a result of total land area available for development, Mumbai is limited. We start to see high density in many parts of the city. So the cost of real estate of housing is much less than cost of Mumbai and suburban areas because of this crowdedness. So many government and corporate offices have been shifted from Mumbai to Navi Mumbai, and Mumbai offers job opportunities for every conceivable kind, from engineers, mechanics, clerks, and so forth. As a result, a large population of service class and middle class population shifted to the area of Navi Mumbai. So we now go to the different types of these city planning. We have the first type. I think we are now at the middle of the lecture. So do you have any questions?
No, doctor.
Okay, do you have any
No,
comments?
doctor, everything is clear. No.
Okay, so we can now stand up, stretch, and sit down again. Everyone stand up, stretch, and sit down again. You have to keep your blood circulating not sitting for a long time. Okay. So the first type that we saw was the radiocentric city. The radiocentric city is the city that radiates from a center outwards. So this, of course, depends on the geography, if it's possible or not. If the type of land is appropriate for this spreading in all directions or not, or if it's limited by some natural elements like a sea or a mountain or a river or something, then it will confine that and will not make that possible. So radiocentric city, they radiate outward from a common center, inner outer ring roads linked by radiating roads. Core has business area, industrial area, and interspersed within the residential. Periphery has green belt. One examples are Moscow, Washington, pre-industrial Baghdad. On the recent, we have Kuwait. We have and small parts of Jeddah, but Kuwait is a prototype of this application of radiocentric city. And the advantage of a radiocentric city is that it grows in different directions. So it makes expansion easier and the growth easier. Graphic elements, it will confine the expansion to one or two directions only. So it's an advantage to have a direct line of travel for centrally directed flows. Economics of single centralized terminal or origin point. So we have a coherent planning again. Disadvantages is that it increases the congestion because of this centralized point. Everyone wants to go there for work and business. Local flow problems, the traffic problems, and difficult building sites, because for construction you need to have a clear flow of materials, of labor. So when you have sites within the city, it makes it difficult to construct. The second example, or the second type, is the gridiron city. And this is commonly a big part of Jeddah here is following this gridiron city, north, south streets and east-west streets, creating this gridiron. So it is composed of straight streets crossing at right angle to create many regular city blocks. This form is typical of cities built after the Industrial Revolution. After the Industrial and Revolution, after the World Wars, cities started to all look the same, gridiron planning. And because only then did cities place such importance on economic activity. If we look at it from only economic point of view, the gridiron will win. It's easier to design, easier to implement, cheaper to construct, but it has many drawbacks. A city gridiron plan facilitates the movement of people and products throughout the city. Also, New York City is built according to the gridiron. طبعا it has many advantages. It's highly accessible. minimum disruption of flow, expansion flexibility, excellent psychological orientation. خلاص you can يعني understand the city in a glance. North, south, east, west, 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D. You know the city in no time. Adaptability to level of moderately rolling terrain. But it has many disadvantages. It requires flow hierarchies. So we cannot have all the squares or all the pieces with the same density and the same function or use. So we have to think about the hierarchy of the density, the usage, and whether every function is appropriate for this shape or not. It's limited in its adaptability to the terrain. If you have mountains, you have different topographical conditions, it doesn't make sense to use the grid iron. And it's boring. It's potentially monotonous because everything in the city looks the same. There is also the linear city, and our example here will be the northern development of Jeddah. It's taking the linear design or the linear planning. Expand the city along the spine of transportation. The linear city concept is a conscious form of urban development with housing and industry growing along the highway between existing cities and contained by the continuous open space of the rural countryside. The linear city has advantages and disadvantages. It's high acceptability, adaptability to linear growth. You can grow the city in the linear fashion indefinitely, useful along limited edge. But its disadvantages, it's very sensitive to blockage. So if you have a traffic jam or a traffic block somewhere in the middle, it blocks the flow to the other parts. So people start to take detours and find other streets. So it starts to create a problem. And it's linear fashion or linear pattern makes that there is no focus in the city. It doesn't have a focal point or center or nucleus that people recognize. So the choice of connection or of direction of movement are much less. You have no choice, no limited choices of direction. And the city growth of the can grow in different ways. So they can grow outward, they can grow upward, and they can grow interstitially, so toward more dense. So they have a combination between the outward and the upward. As we see, many cities also in the Gulf are selecting the approaches that they want. Outward, they expand the roads and create new neighborhoods. Upward, we see the skyscrapers and the towers are going up in many cities to increase to expand vertically. Or create more dense. How do we create more dense? Like what happened in Kuwait and Jeddah, they started to divide the large plots of land into two. Or three or four. So they create more dense in the same city instead of expanding the city outward or upward. So as long as the intra-city traffic moved only by foot, possibilities of horizontal and vertical expansion were strictly limited. Growth was mainly interstitial, filling up every square yard of vacant land left between buildings. So they start to increase the density by not expanding, but by using the existing land to have more buildings. With the end of that was طبعا with elevators and steel structures, vertical growth of skyscrapers began. And the city of Dubai is famous of its high-rise buildings. Abu Dhabi also is taking the same approach. While if we look at other cities like Kuwait is using the high-rise buildings now in the city center and expanding horizontally. So you can have a hybrid approach in different parts of the city. While you look at other cities, they strict the height to 4 floors, for example. So you find that the growth must go horizontal. Suburb spread out horizontally along streetcar and bus lines and around suburban railroad stations surrounded by wide open spaces. So what kind of models we can think about to make the urban areas and the cities more sensitive to the nature? So there are some models that are introduced. The first is the concentric zone model. Cities grow radially outward away from a single center. Different land uses are distributed like the concentric cities. فيها central business district, zone in transition, low-class residential zone, middle-class residential zone, high-class residential zone, and so forth. So this is a model of how a concentric zone city might look like. So we have the CBD, the Central Business District. We have a transition zone, and then zone for workers, and then zone for higher class residents, and then zone for people who can travel long distances with cars and outside. So as when we go far from the center, we reduce the density and we have more green. So we don't have the same pattern all over the city. And that way we limit the city expansion in endless directions. Yeah. طبعا also there are criticism of this theory. The physical features, land may restrict growth of certain sectors if we don't have access to land. Commuter villages defy the theory, being in the commuter zone but located far from the city. Decentralization of shops, manufacturing industry, and entertainment. And it assumes an isotropic plane and even an unchanging landscape. So here, monotony and repetition. There is another interesting model called the sector model. So the sector model of cities, all land uses except the CBD form sectors around the city. So instead of circles, now we create sectors. The land uses zones are influenced by radial transport routes. High central and low central areas repel one another. So this is another model of how the city might be. We have sectors Each sector is connected to the central business district and contains a different type of activity. And while we have the transportation and industrial spine going through the city. So we have low income. I don't like the word low class. It's low income and residents. And we have middle class or high, one they still use the word class, middle class and high class houses. So, so these are the different sectors. So unlike the concentric zone model, it's a sector model. It also has criticism. It's low-cost housing is near industrial and transportation. It is based on 20th century and does not take into account cars, which make commerce easier. With cars, people can live anywhere and further from the city and still travel to the CBD. So not only do high-class residents have cars, but almost everyone nowadays have a car. Another model is the multi-nucleal model. So instead of having one center for the city, we have several centers. They can create a hierarchy. And they can distribute the density and the need for the central business district to different parts. So a model of urban land use in which a city grows for several independent points rather than from one central business district. So we have several secondary district, central centers. We can specify different functions for each one and for different facilities or sites depending on the topography and the geography of the city. A port district needs suitable waterfront, for example. So similar functions may group together for agglomeration economies. So the city might look something like this. We have a center for business, a center for commerce, a center for education, a center for health care, a center. So we can have different centers in the city. Each one can be self-sufficient, and we can also have several mixed use centers, not only single function nuclei. So this is another model that we can also criticize. It's the negligence of height of buildings, non-existence of abrupt divisions between zones, and no consideration of influence of physical relief and government policy. The concept may not be totally applicable to Oriental cities with different cultural, economic, and political backgrounds. Okay, that is the end of our lecture.